Amelia Hayes stood frozen in the marble foyer of the Riverside Country Club, watching her ex-husband Richard celebrate his new marriage while the ink on their divorce papers was still wet. The scene unfolded like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Richard had his arm wrapped around his new wife, a 25-year-old blonde named Brittany, while a crowd of their former mutual friends gathered around them with champagne glasses raised high. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice boomed across the room, his perfect smile gleaming under the crystal chandelier. "I want you all to meet my beautiful wife, Brittany Sterling." The crowd erupted in applause and congratulations. Amelia felt her stomach twist as she realized he had planned this moment, perfectly scheduling his celebration for the exact same day their divorce was finalized. Richard's eyes found hers across the room, and his smile turned cruel. "You know," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "some people are just meant to be winners and others." He paused dramatically, his gaze still locked on Amelia. "Well, others are meant to be forgotten." Brittany giggled and pressed closer to Richard's side. "Darling, don't be mean," she said in a voice that was all sugar and no substance. "Some people just aren't built for success like we are." The crowd laughed, and Amelia felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her. These people had been her friends once, had attended dinner parties at the home she and Richard had shared for 8 years. Now they looked at her like she was a stranger who had wandered in from the street. "Amelia worked as an archivist," Richard continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "Spent her days with dusty old papers and dead people's belongings. No ambition, no drive. I tried to help her become something more, but you can't polish a rock into a diamond." Heat flooded Amelia's cheeks, but she kept her chin high. She had spent 3 years working as an archivist for the mysterious Silas Blackwood, organizing his vast collection of historical documents and family records. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was meaningful. Richard had always mocked her job, calling it a waste of her college degree. "The best decision I ever made was realizing I deserved better," Richard said, pulling Brittany closer. "Some people hold you back and some people lift you up. Brittany here understands success, understands what it means to be a winner." Amelia's hands trembled as she clutched her purse tighter. Part of her wanted to walk over there and tell everyone exactly what kind of man Richard really was. She wanted to expose how he had cheated on her for 2 years, how he had hidden money from her during the divorce, how he had systematically destroyed her confidence with his constant criticism. But she didn't. Instead, she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Behind her, she could hear the laughter and conversation resume, as if her presence had been nothing more than a minor interruption to their perfect evening. "Leaving so soon?" Richard's voice called out behind her. "Don't you want to congratulate the happy couple?" Amelia paused at the doorway but didn't turn around. "Congratulations," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Then she walked out into the night. The cool air hit her face as she stepped outside, and she finally allowed herself to breathe. The valet brought her modest sedan around, a stark contrast to the luxury cars filling the parking lot. As she drove away from the country club, she caught a glimpse of Richard and Brittany through the large windows, still surrounded by admirers. 8 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. Not with sadness or mutual respect, but with public humiliation designed to crush whatever dignity she had left. Richard had taken everything from her in the divorce, the house, most of their shared assets, even their mutual friends. He had convinced everyone that she was the reason their marriage failed, that she was holding him back from achieving his full potential. Amelia drove through the quiet streets toward her small apartment, the one-bedroom place she had rented after moving out of the house she and Richard had shared. It was a far cry from their former home with its sprawling garden and pool, but it was hers. No one could take it away from her or use it as a weapon against her. As she pulled into her parking space, her phone buzzed with notifications. Social media was already flooding with photos from Richard's celebration, tagged with captions like, "New beginnings," and "True love wins." She turned off her phone without looking at any more. Inside her apartment, Amelia finally let the tears come. She had held them back for months, through the divorce proceedings, through the property division, through watching Richard parade his new relationship in front of everyone they knew. But now, alone in her empty apartment, she allowed herself to grieve. She grieved for the woman she used to be, the one who believed in love and loyalty and happy endings. She grieved for the 8 years she had given to a man who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. Most of all, she grieved for the future she had imagined, the one that would never exist now. Tomorrow she would have to face the world as Richard's discarded ex-wife, the woman who wasn't good enough to keep her successful husband. Everyone would look at her with pity or judgment, wondering what she had done wrong. The story Richard had crafted about their marriage would become the accepted truth, and she would have to live with the consequences. But tonight, in the quiet of her small apartment, Amelia made herself a promise. She would survive this. She would rebuild her life from nothing if she had to. Richard might have won this battle, but he had underestimated her strength. She was more than the sum of his insults, more than the woman he had tried to diminish and destroy. As she prepared for bed, Amelia looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her eyes were red from crying and her carefully applied makeup was smudged, but there was something else there too. A spark of determination that Richard's cruelty hadn't been able to extinguish. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never let anyone make her feel this small again. 3 days after the divorce finalization, Amelia sat in her small apartment kitchen, mechanically eating cereal from a chipped bowl while scrolling through job listings on her laptop. Her savings were running dangerously low, and she needed to find work soon. The modest settlement from her divorce wouldn't last long, especially with Richard's lawyers having fought her on every single asset. Her phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize with an area code from downtown. Probably another bill collector or telemarketer. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Hello? Is this Mrs. Amelia Hayes? The voice was crisp and professional, belonging to an older man with a slight accent she couldn't place. It's Miss Hayes now, she corrected automatically. Who is this? My name is Jonathan Sterling, senior partner at Sterling, Blackwood & Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Silas Blackwood. Are you the Amelia Hayes who worked as Mr. Blackwood's personal archivist from 2021 to 2024? Amelia nearly dropped her spoon. Silas Blackwood was dead? Yes, that's me. Is Mr. Blackwood okay? I'm afraid Mr. Blackwood passed away 5 days ago in his sleep. It was peaceful, according to his medical team. I'm calling because you've been named in his will, Ms. Hayes. I need to schedule a meeting with you as soon as possible. The words didn't make sense. Amelia stared at the wall of her tiny kitchen, trying to process what she was hearing. Silas Blackwood had been her employer for 3 years, but their relationship had been strictly professional. He was a reclusive billionaire who rarely spoke to anyone directly, preferring to communicate through his staff. She had organized his massive collection of family documents, historical papers, and personal records, but they had barely exchanged more than a few dozen words in all that time. Named in his will? She repeated slowly. Are you sure you have the right person? I was just an employee. I'm quite certain, Ms. Hayes. In fact, you are the primary beneficiary of Mr. Blackwood's estate. I understand this must come as a shock, but I really do need to meet with you immediately. There are time-sensitive matters that require your attention. Primary beneficiary? The phone felt slippery in her suddenly sweaty palm. I think there's been a mistake. Mr. Blackwood barely knew me. We never even had a real conversation. Miss Hayes, I assure you there is no mistake. Mr. Blackwood was very specific in his instructions. Can you come to my office this afternoon? We're located in the Blackwood Tower downtown, 42nd floor. Amelia's mind reeled. The Blackwood Tower was one of the most prestigious addresses in the city, a gleaming 60-story monument to corporate power. She had never been there despite working for Silas Blackwood. All of her work had been done at his private estate outside the city, in a climate-controlled archive room that housed centuries of Blackwood family history. Yes, I can be there. What time? How about 2 o'clock? I'll have my secretary prepare the conference room. Oh, and Miss Hayes? You might want to arrange for some privacy after our meeting. This will likely require your full attention for the next several days. After hanging up, Amelia sat in stunned silence. Silas Blackwood was dead and somehow she was in his will. It didn't make sense. During her 3 years of employment, she had seen him maybe a dozen times, always briefly and always in passing. He was a tall, imposing man in his 70s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. Their interactions had been limited to polite nods and the occasional good morning. She spent the rest of the morning in a daze trying to make sense of the situation. Maybe he had left her a small bequest, a token of appreciation for her work. A few $1,000s, perhaps, or maybe some books from his vast library. It would be enough to help her get back on her feet, to buy her some time to find a new job. The Blackwood Tower loomed over downtown like a glass and steel giant. Amelia had never felt so small as she did walking through the marble lobby, past the waterfall feature and the abstract sculptures that probably cost more than her annual salary. The elevator whisked her to the 42nd floor in seconds, opening into a reception area that looked like something from a luxury magazine. Jonathan Sterling was exactly what she had expected from his voice. Distinguished, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her car. He greeted her warmly but with an undercurrent of barely contained excitement that made her nervous. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for coming so quickly. Please have a seat. Can I offer you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thank you." Amelia perched on the edge of the leather chair across from his massive mahogany desk. "Mr. Sterling, I have to say I'm completely confused about why I'm here. Mr. Blackwood and I barely knew each other." Sterling's eyebrows rose. "Ms. Hayes, I think you greatly underestimated your relationship with Silas. He spoke of you often, always with the highest praise. He said you were the only person who truly understood the importance of preserving history, of honoring the past while building for the future." "He said that? But we barely spoke to each other." Silas was a man of few words, but he was always watching, always evaluating. "He told me that you treated his family's legacy with more care and respect than his own relatives ever had. He said you understood that history isn't just about dates and events, but about the human stories that shape our world." Sterling opened a thick folder on his desk and pulled out several documents. "Ms. Hayes, Silas Blackwood has left you his entire estate. All of it. The companies, the properties, the investments, the personal assets. You are now the sole owner of the Blackwood Empire, worth approximately $75 billion. The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs, felt the room spin around her. $75 billion. It was an impossible number, too large to comprehend. That can't be right," she whispered. "People don't just give away billions of dollars to employees they barely know." Silas had no living relatives he trusted with his legacy. His nephew, who he originally intended to inherit, died in a car accident 3 years ago. His other relatives? Well, let's just say Silas didn't believe they shared his values. He spent months researching potential heirs, people who might understand the responsibility that comes with this kind of wealth and power. Sterling leaned forward, his expression serious. "He chose you, Ms. Hayes, because he believed you would honor his legacy and use his resources to make the world better. He left detailed letters explaining his decision, along with instructions for how he hoped you would handle the inheritance." Amelia's hands trembled as she stared at the documents spread across the desk. Stock certificates, property deeds, bank statements with numbers that made her head spin. This morning she had been worried about paying her rent. Now she was being told she was one of the richest people in the world. "There are conditions, of course," Sterling continued. "The inheritance comes with certain responsibilities and expectations. Silas wanted to ensure his companies continue to operate according to his values, and he wanted his charitable foundations to expand their work. But essentially, Ms. Hayes, you now own one of the largest business empires in the country." She thought about Richard, probably at that very moment bragging to someone about his successful construction company and his perfect new wife. He had no idea that the woman he had humiliated just 3 days ago was now worth more than he could ever dream of being. The irony was so profound it almost made her laugh. But more than that, she felt a strange sense of destiny settling over her. Maybe this wasn't random at all. Maybe Silas Blackwood had seen something in her that she didn't even see in herself. Maybe he had given her not just wealth, but the tools to become the person she was always meant to be. The conference room on the 43rd floor of Blackwood Tower felt like a cathedral of corporate power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, while the walls displayed portraits of previous Blackwood patriarchs dating back to the 1800s. Jonathan Sterling had spent the past 2 hours walking Amelia through the basic structure of her inheritance, but the numbers still felt surreal. "The Blackwood Group consists of 12 major companies," Sterling explained, pointing to an organizational chart that covered an entire wall. "Construction and development, technology, renewable energy, real estate, media, and financial services. Then there are the smaller subsidiaries, about 40 companies total." Amelia stared at the chart, her mind struggling to process the scope of what she now owned. "And all of these companies are profitable?" "Extremely profitable. The Blackwood Group generated $18 billion in revenue last year alone." Silas was a brilliant businessman who never lost sight of long-term sustainability over short-term gains. Sterling pulled out another folder, this one containing handwritten letters on expensive stationery. "Before we continue with the business overview, I think you should read these. Silas left them specifically for you." The first letter was dated just 6 months ago, written in Silas Blackwood's precise handwriting. "My dear Amelia, if you are reading this, then I have passed on and you are learning about your inheritance. I imagine you are shocked and perhaps overwhelmed. That is natural. But I want you to understand that this decision was not made lightly or impulsively. During your 3 years in my employment, I watched you work with a dedication and integrity that has become rare in our world. You treated every document, every photograph, every piece of our family's history as if it were a sacred trust. You never rushed, never cut corners, never treated your work as just a job to get through. More importantly, I observed how you treated the staff at Blackwood Manor. You learned everyone's names, remembered their families, showed genuine interest in their lives. In a world where wealth often breeds indifference to others, you remained consistently kind and humble. I chose you as my heir because I believe you will use this power responsibly. You understand that wealth is not just about personal comfort, but about the ability to create positive change in the world. I trust you to continue the Blackwood legacy of building businesses that serve society while generating prosperity. The path ahead will not be easy. There will be those who question your right to this inheritance, who will test your resolve and try to manipulate you. Stay true to the values I observed in you. Remember that power is most dangerous when it corrupts the person who wields it. I have faith in you, Amelia. I believe you will exceed even my highest expectations. Respectfully yours, Silas Blackwood. Tears blurred Amelia's vision as she finished reading. She had never realized that Silas had been observing her so closely, that her work had meant anything more to him than simply maintaining his archives. The second letter was shorter but more specific. Amelia, by now you understand the scope of your inheritance. I want to share some guidance about how to approach this responsibility. First, trust Jonathan Sterling completely. He has been my attorney and advisor for 30 years. He knows my wishes and will help you navigate the complex legal and financial aspects of your new position. Second, be patient with yourself. You do not need to make major changes immediately. Take time to learn about each company, understand their operations, meet the key personnel. The businesses are well managed and will continue to function while you educate yourself. Third, remember that you are not alone in this. The Blackwood Group employs thousands of talented people who are committed to our mission. Listen to them, learn from them, but ultimately trust your own judgment. Finally, use this power to build the world you want to live in. I have tried to do this through my business practices and charitable work, but you will have your own vision. Follow it fearlessly. The future of the Blackwood legacy is in your hands now. I am confident you will honor it while making it your own. S.B. Amelia set the letters down and looked across the table at Sterling. He really believed I could do this? Absolutely. Silas was not a sentimental man, Miss Hayes. He made this decision based on careful observation and sound judgment. He saw qualities in you that perhaps you haven't fully recognized in yourself. What about his family? Didn't anyone contest the will? Sterling's expression darkened slightly. There were some attempts. Silas's surviving relatives were not pleased with his decision. His cousin Robert tried to challenge the will, claiming Silas was not of sound mind when he wrote it. But Silas anticipated this and took extensive precautions. Multiple doctors examined him and confirmed his mental competency. The will is ironclad. Where are his relatives now? Scattered and angry mostly. Robert Blackwood runs a small investment firm that has been struggling for years. He expected to inherit enough to save his business. Silas's other cousin, Patricia, lives in Europe and hasn't spoken to the family in decades. There are a few distant relatives, but none who were close to Silas or involved in the business. Amelia absorbed this information, realizing that she would likely face resentment and hostility from people who felt they deserved her inheritance more than she did. It was a sobering thought. What happens now? She asked. Now you become the chairwoman and CEO of Blackwood Industries. There will be board meetings to attend, executives to meet, decisions to make. But first, I suggest you move into Blackwood Manor. It's your home now, and it will give you privacy while you adjust to your new circumstances. Blackwood Manor. Amelia had worked there for 3 years but had never thought of it as anything other than her workplace. The sprawling estate sat on 200 acres outside the city, complete with gardens, a lake, and enough room to house a small town. The idea of living there alone seemed overwhelming. There's a full staff at the manor, Sterling continued, reading her expression. Mrs. Patterson has been the head housekeeper for 20 years. James manages the grounds. They're wonderful people who will help you settle in. As they wrapped up the meeting, Sterling handed her a set of keys and a thick briefing book. This contains everything you need to know about your immediate responsibilities. Take the weekend to read through it, get settled at the manor, and we'll meet again on Monday to begin the transition process. Walking through the lobby of Blackwood Tower an hour later, Amelia felt like she was moving through a dream. The security guards nodded respectfully as she passed, and she realized they probably already knew who she was. Word would spread quickly through the company that Silas Blackwood's mysterious heir had finally appeared. Outside, a black sedan waited at the curb. Sterling had arranged for a driver to take her to the manor, explaining that she would need to make arrangements for permanent transportation. So, as the car glided through traffic toward the suburbs, Amelia stared out at the city she now had the power to influence and shape. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister in California. Saw Richard's wedding announcement in the paper. Are you okay? Call me if you need to talk. Amelia almost laughed. If only her sister knew that while Richard was celebrating his new marriage, his ex-wife had just inherited one of the largest fortunes in the world. The timing was so perfect it felt like divine intervention. As they drove through the gates of Blackwood Manor, past the manicured lawns and ancient oak trees, Amelia made a mental note to herself. She would use this power wisely, just as Silas had requested. But she would also use it to ensure that no one would ever underestimate her or treat her as less than she was worth again. Richard had called her a failure, a woman with no ambition or drive. Soon he would discover just how wrong he had been. The first morning Amelia woke up in Blackwood Manor, she lay in the massive four-poster bed for several minutes, convinced she was still dreaming. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked gardens so perfectly manicured they looked like a painting. The bedroom suite was larger than her entire apartment had been, complete with a sitting area, walk-in closet, and marble bathroom that belonged in a luxury spa. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Hayes? I'm Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper. Mr. Sterling called to let us know you'd arrived last night. Would you like breakfast in your room or in the dining room?" Amelia wrapped herself in the silk robe she'd found hanging in the bathroom and opened the door. Mrs. Patterson was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked exactly like what Amelia had always imagined the perfect housekeeper would look like. "The dining room would be fine," Amelia said, then immediately wondered if that was the right choice. "Or actually, wherever is easiest for you." Mrs. Patterson smiled warmly. "The breakfast room overlooks the garden, and James has been working on the rose beds all week. They're particularly beautiful this morning. Why don't you take your time getting ready, and I'll have everything set up in 30 minutes. After Mrs. Patterson left, Amelia stood in front of the closet, staring at her modest collection of clothes hanging in the vast space. Everything she owned looked shabby and inadequate in these surroundings. She had been living paycheck to paycheck for months during the divorce proceedings, unable to afford new clothes or anything beyond basic necessities. She settled on her best pair of jeans and a simple blouse, then made her way downstairs. The manor was even more impressive in daylight than it had been during her working hours. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that she now realized was probably worth millions of dollars. Every surface gleamed, every flower arrangement was perfect, every detail spoke of unlimited resources and impeccable taste. The breakfast room was a sun-filled space with French doors that opened onto a terrace. Mrs. Patterson had set the table with fine china and crystal, as if Amelia were royalty instead of a former archivist who had been eating cereal from chipped bowls just days before. "I wasn't sure what you preferred," Mrs. Patterson said, wheeling in a cart loaded with options. "We have fresh fruit, pastries from the bakery in town, eggs prepared any way you like, bacon, sausage, yogurt, and several types of juice. Cook can prepare anything else you might want." The spread was overwhelming. Amelia was used to grabbing a piece of toast on her way out the door, not elaborate breakfast productions that required their own serving cart. "This is wonderful, thank you. But please, you don't need to go to so much trouble. I'm used to much simpler meals." Mrs. Patterson looked concerned. Mr. Blackwood always said that the morning meal set the tone for the entire day. He insisted on starting each day properly, with good food and a few minutes of peaceful reflection. As Amelia ate, she found herself thinking about Silas Blackwood and the life he had lived in this beautiful house. Had he been lonely, rattling around in all this space by himself? Had he enjoyed the formal meals and perfect service, or had it all felt as overwhelming to him as it did to her? After breakfast, she spent the morning exploring the house, reacquainting herself with rooms she had passed through but never really examined during her work years. The library was her favorite discovery, 3 stories of books with a spiral staircase and reading nooks tucked into alcoves. Many of the books were first editions or rare volumes, but there were also contemporary novels, biographies, and business books that showed Silas had been a voracious reader. In his study, she found the desk where she assumed he had written the letters she'd read yesterday. It was a massive piece of furniture made from what looked like a single piece of walnut, with brass fittings and leather inlay. Personal photographs sat on one corner, pictures of a much younger Silas with people she assumed were family members, all of them now gone. Her phone rang, jolting her from her exploration. The caller ID showed her mother's number. "Amelia, honey, I've been so worried about you. How are you holding up after the divorce?" Amelia sank into one of the leather chairs in the study, suddenly overwhelmed by the surreal nature of her situation. 24 hours ago, her mother's concern about the divorce had been the most pressing issue in her life. Now she was a billionaire sitting in a mansion, and she hadn't told anyone about her inheritance yet. I'm doing better than expected, Mom." "Are you sure? You sound strange. Where are you?" "It's so quiet. I'm at a friend's house." It wasn't exactly a lie, though calling Silas Blackwood a friend felt presumptuous even after his death. They talked for a few more minutes, with her mother offering to visit and help her get back on her feet. Amelia managed to deflect the offer without revealing her changed circumstances. She wasn't ready to explain this to anyone yet, wasn't sure she could make them believe it even if she tried. After hanging up, she returned to exploring her new home. The wine cellar contained bottles that were probably older than she was. The art collection included paintings she recognized from textbooks. The garage housed a collection of luxury cars that looked like they belonged in a museum. But it was the small details that began to make the place feel real to her. Fresh flowers in every room, replaced weekly by a local florist. A kitchen garden that supplied herbs and vegetables to the cook. Staff quarters where Mrs. Patterson and 2 other live-in employees made their home, creating a sense of family and community within the larger estate. That afternoon, Jonathan Sterling arrived with a team of financial advisors and business managers. They set up in the formal dining room, spreading documents across the long mahogany table like they were planning a military campaign. "The first order of business is establishing your personal security," Sterling announced. "As one of the wealthiest individuals in the country, you'll need protection. I've already contacted a reputable firm that handles security for high-net-worth clients." The idea of needing bodyguards felt absurd, but Sterling was insistent. "It's not just about physical safety, Miss Hayes. It's about privacy, about protecting you from people who might try to take advantage of your new situation." They spent the next few hours going over the basics of her new life. Financial accounts that required her signature and approval. Insurance policies that needed to be updated. Legal documents that transferred various assets into her name. It was mind-numbing in its complexity, but Sterling and his team patiently explained each step. "We've also arranged for a personal assistant," one of the advisors mentioned. "Someone to manage your calendar, handle correspondence, coordinate with various departments." The position has already been filled by Rebecca Martinez, who worked directly with Mr. Blackwood for the past 5 years. That evening, alone in the vast mansion, Amelia found herself standing on the terrace outside the breakfast room, looking out over the gardens as the sun set. The silence was profound, no traffic noise, no neighbors, no sounds of urban life. Just birds and wind and the distant sound of water from the fountain near the rose garden. For the first time since receiving Sterling's phone call, she allowed herself to really think about what this meant for her future. She had gone from being Richard's discarded ex-wife to being one of the most powerful people in the state. She had resources now that could change not just her own life, but the lives of thousands of other people. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Saw the news about Blackwood's death in the business section. Wild that nobody knows who inherited everything. Hope it's someone who deserves it." Amelia stared at the message, wondering who T was and how they had gotten her number. Then she realized it was probably just a misdirected text, meant for someone else entirely. But the sentiment made her think about what it meant to deserve something like this. Did she deserve it? She had worked hard, had been kind and honest and dedicated. But so had millions of other people who would never see a fraction of the wealth that had just fallen into her lap. The randomness of it was staggering. If Richard hadn't left her, if she hadn't needed the job at Blackwood Manor, if Silas had chosen someone else to organize his archives, her life would be completely different. But here she was, and the question now wasn't whether she deserved it, but what she was going to do with it. As she prepared for bed in her new home, Amelia made a decision. Tomorrow she would start learning everything she could about the Blackwood companies and how to run them. She would prove that Silas Blackwood's faith in her had been justified. And somewhere along the way she would make sure Richard understood exactly what he had thrown away. 3 weeks into her new life, Amelia sat in the boardroom at the top of Blackwood Tower, surrounded by executives who had been running various divisions of the company for years. The mahogany table was polished to a mirror shine, and the walls were lined with awards and commendations the Blackwood Group had received for everything from environmental innovation to employee satisfaction. Rebecca Martinez, her new personal assistant, had prepared detailed briefings on each executive, complete with photographs and career summaries. Amelia had spent hours memorizing names, faces, and key accomplishments, determined not to appear as overwhelmed as she felt. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan Sterling began, "I'd like to introduce you to Amelia Hayes, the new chairwoman and CEO of Blackwood Industries." The introductions went smoothly, though Amelia could sense the mixture of curiosity and skepticism in the room. These were people who had worked with Silas Blackwood for decades, who had built their careers within his empire. Now they were being asked to follow someone who had been filing his family papers just a month ago. "I know this transition is unusual," Amelia said once the introductions were complete. "I'm not going to pretend I have Mr. Blackwood's experience or expertise. But I'm here to learn, and I'm committed to honoring his vision while bringing my own perspective to the company." Michael Chin, the head of the construction division, leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Hayes, what is your background in business management? I understand you worked as an archivist." The question wasn't hostile, but it wasn't exactly friendly either. Amelia had been expecting it. "You're right, Mr. Chin. I don't have an MBA or years of corporate experience. But I do have 3 years of intensive exposure to Mr. Blackwood's business philosophy through organizing his papers and correspondence. I've read every major decision memo he wrote, every strategic plan he developed, every acquisition analysis he commissioned. I may not have lived his business experience, but I've studied it in detail." She pulled out a folder from the stack in front of her. "For instance, I know that your division has been consistently profitable for the past 8 years, with annual revenue growth averaging 12%. I also know that you've been pushing for expansion into renewable energy construction, specifically solar panel installation and wind farm development." Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. He obviously hadn't expected her to be familiar with the specifics of his division's performance. "I've been reviewing all of our business units over the past few weeks," Amelia continued, "and I'm particularly interested in Mr. Chen's renewable energy proposal. It aligns perfectly with Mr. Blackwood's long-term vision for the company, and I think we should fast-track it for implementation." The mood in the room shifted perceptibly. These executives had been expecting to manage a figurehead, someone who would sign papers and let them continue running their divisions without interference. Instead, they were discovering that their new boss had done her homework. For the next 2 hours, they went through each division's current projects and future plans. Amelia asked detailed questions, referenced specific documents from Silas's files, and demonstrated a grasp of the business that surprised everyone in the room. When they reached the financial services division, headed by a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Walsh, Amelia paused over one particular report. "I see we have several outstanding loans to smaller construction companies in the area," she said, scanning the list of borrowers. "One name stands out to me: Sterling Construction. They owe us approximately $2 million across 3 different loan agreements." Walsh nodded. "Yes, that's correct. It's a local company owned by Richard Sterling. They've been clients for about 5 years, though their payment history has been inconsistent lately." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. Richard Sterling. Her ex-husband's company owed money to one of her subsidiaries. The irony was so perfect it almost made her laugh. "What's their current status?" she asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "They're 60 days behind on their most recent payment, and 90 days behind on another loan. We've sent notices, but they've requested extensions. Mr. Blackwood generally preferred to work with borrowers when possible, rather than forcing immediate collection." "I see." Amelia made a note on her legal pad. "Let's schedule a separate meeting to review all of our outstanding loans. I want to understand our exposure and develop a more proactive approach to collections." After the meeting ended and the executives filed out, Rebecca approached with Amelia's afternoon schedule. "You have 3 more meetings today," Rebecca said, "and then dinner with the mayor's Economic Development Committee. They're hoping to discuss the downtown revitalization project. Before we continue, I need you to pull all the files on Sterling Construction. Every loan document, every payment record, every communication we've had with them. I want everything on my desk by tomorrow morning." Rebecca made a note. "Is there a particular reason you're interested in that account?" "Personal research," Amelia said simply. "Nothing urgent, just something I want to understand better." That evening, as she was driven home to Blackwood Manor, Amelia couldn't stop thinking about the discovery that Richard's company owed her money. She had known he ran a construction business, but she had never been involved in the financial side of his work. During their marriage, he had kept his business affairs completely separate, claiming she wouldn't understand the complexities of construction finance. Now she owned the bank that was funding his projects. Back at the manor, she found Mrs. Patterson waiting with dinner and a stack of newspapers. "I thought you might want to see these," Mrs. Patterson said, setting down the papers. "The business journals are all running stories about Mr. Blackwood's successor. Most of them are quite positive." The headlines were variations on the same theme: mystery heir takes control of Blackwood empire, and from archivist to executive, the unlikely rise of Amelia Hayes. One article included a photo of her leaving Blackwood Tower, looking more confident than she felt. But it was the smaller story in the local business section that caught her attention. Local construction company struggles with cash flow. The article was about several small construction firms that were facing challenges in the current economy, and Sterling Construction was mentioned prominently. Richard Sterling, owner of Sterling Construction, acknowledged that the company has faced some financial difficulties recently, the article quoted. However, Sterling expressed confidence that new contracts and improved market conditions would resolve any short-term issues. Amelia set down the paper and reached for her phone. She had been avoiding social media since her inheritance, but curiosity finally got the better of her. Richard's business Facebook page hadn't been updated in months, and his personal Instagram account showed increasingly desperate attempts to project success photos of expensive dinners, luxury cars that she now suspected might be rented, and constant pictures of him and Brittany at high-end events. But if she looked closely, she could see the signs of stress. Richard's face was thinner than it had been during their marriage, and there were shadows under his eyes that expensive clothes couldn't hide. Brittany's smile looked forced in many of the recent photos, and her body language suggested someone who was beginning to have doubts about her choices. The final photo in Richard's feed was from just 2 days ago. Him and Brittany at a charity gala, with the caption, "Supporting important causes with my beautiful wife. Success means having the resources to give back to the community." Amelia almost laughed at the irony. Richard was posting about having resources to give back while his company was behind on loan payments to her subsidiaries. He was so focused on maintaining appearances that he was probably spending money he didn't have. That night, lying in the massive bed that still felt surreal, Amelia began to formulate a plan. She wasn't going to actively try to destroy Richard. That would be beneath her new position and contrary to Silas Blackwood's values. But she wasn't going to go out of her way to save him either. If Richard's company couldn't meet its obligations, then the consequences would be entirely his own doing. All she had to do was enforce the same standards that any responsible lender would apply. Sometimes the best revenge was simply allowing people to face the natural consequences of their own actions. 4 weeks later, Amelia sat across from Patricia Walsh in the executive conference room, reviewing a comprehensive report on all outstanding loans in their portfolio. The financial services division managed over $1 billion in commercial lending, from small business loans to major development projects. "Sterling Construction presents an interesting case," Walsh said, pulling up their file on her laptop. "They've been clients for 5 years, initially very reliable. But over the past 18 months, their payment patterns have become increasingly erratic." Amelia studied the payment history displayed on the screen. The decline was clear and consistent: longer gaps between payments, smaller amounts, more frequent requests for extensions. What's causing their cash flow problems? Several factors. They overextended on a luxury housing development that didn't sell as quickly as projected. They're also facing increased competition from larger construction firms that can bid more aggressively. And Walsh paused, looking slightly uncomfortable. "And what?" "Well, there are rumors about the owner's personal spending. Richard Sterling has been maintaining a very high-profile lifestyle: expensive cars, luxury vacations, country club memberships. Some people in the industry question whether he's prioritizing appearances over business stability." Amelia nodded thoughtfully. That sounded exactly like the Richard she had been married to, so concerned with image and status that he would risk everything to maintain the illusion of success. "What are our options regarding the overdue payments?" Walsh opened another document. "Standard protocol would be to issue a formal demand for payment with a 30-day deadline. If they can't meet that, we can call in the loans and initiate collection proceedings. However, Mr. Blackwood generally preferred to work with struggling borrowers when possible." "Mr. Blackwood's approach was admirable," Amelia said carefully, "but we also have a responsibility to our shareholders and other clients. We can't make exceptions based on sentiment." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline. From this height, she could see the construction crane at the luxury development site that was causing Sterling Construction so many problems. I want you to schedule a meeting with Mr. Sterling, she decided. A formal review of his accounts and payment schedule. Let's give him the opportunity to present a realistic plan for bringing the loans current. Should I mention that you'll be attending the meeting? Amelia smiled slightly. No. Let's keep that as a surprise. That afternoon, Rebecca brought her the rest of Sterling Construction's file, including copies of all loan applications and supporting documents. Reading through Richard's financial statements and business plans from 5 years ago, Amelia could see the pattern that had led to his current troubles. Richard had always been overly optimistic in his projections, assuming best-case scenarios for every variable. His business plans consistently underestimated costs and overestimated revenues. Most tellingly, he had borrowed heavily against future projects that weren't yet secured, creating a house of cards that would collapse if anything went wrong. The loan applications also revealed details about his personal finances that she had never known during their marriage. Richard had been borrowing against their house to fund business operations, had maxed out several credit cards, and had taken cash advances against future contracts. No wonder he had fought so hard to keep their assets during the divorce. He had needed them to maintain his illusion of stability. Her phone rang, interrupting her review of the documents. Miss Hayes? This is Patricia Walsh. I've scheduled the meeting with Sterling Construction for Friday at 2 o'clock. Mr. Sterling seemed eager to discuss his situation. Perfect. Has he asked who will be conducting the review? He assumed it would be me. I didn't correct that assumption. Friday afternoon arrived with unseasonably warm weather that flooded the conference room with bright sunlight. Amelia had chosen her outfit carefully, a tailored navy suit that projected authority without being ostentatious, paired with the pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's. She wanted to look successful but not flashy, professional but not cold. Rebecca buzzed her office at exactly 2 o'clock. Miss Hayes, your 2 o'clock appointment is here. Send him up. Amelia positioned herself at the head of the conference table, with Patricia Walsh to her right and the Sterling Construction files spread in front of her. She heard voices in the hallway outside, Richard's familiar laugh that had once made her heart skip but now left her completely unmoved. The conference room door opened, and Richard walked in with his typical confident swagger, flashing his best business smile. He was impeccably dressed in what looked like a new suit, his hair perfectly styled, projecting an image of success that she now knew was completely manufactured. His smile faltered when he saw her. Amelia? The confusion in his voice was evident. What are you doing here? I'm supposed to meet with Patricia Walsh about our loan situation. I am Patricia Walsh, Walsh said dryly. And this is Amelia Hayes, chairwoman and CEO of Blackwood Industries. The color drained from Richard's face as the implications hit him. His ex-wife, the woman he had publicly humiliated just 2 months ago, was now sitting across from him as the person who controlled his company's financial future. That's impossible, he stammered. Amelia is an archivist. She works with old papers and books. Worked, Amelia corrected calmly. Past tense. I now run the company. You owe $2 million to Richard. Please have a seat. We have a lot to discuss. Richard sank into the chair across from her, his trademark confidence completely evaporated. She could see him trying to process this reversal of fortune, trying to figure out how the woman he had dismissed as a failure was now sitting in a position of power over him. How is this possible? He asked weakly. Silas Blackwood named me as his heir, she said simply. Apparently he valued traits that you never recognized or appreciated. She opened the first folder and pulled out his payment history. But we're not here to discuss my career change, Richard. We're here to discuss your company's failure to meet its loan obligations. You're currently $60,000 behind on payments, and that number is growing every day. Richard tried to regain his composure, straightening his shoulders and attempting to project his old confidence. Look, Amelia, I know we had our differences during the divorce, but this is business. Sterling Construction is a solid company going through a temporary rough patch. All I need is a little more time to. This isn't about our marriage, Amelia interrupted, her voice professional and cool. This is about a borrower who has consistently failed to meet his contractual obligations. Personal feelings don't factor into sound business decisions. She slid a document across the table. This is a formal demand for payment. You have 30 days to bring all accounts current, including penalties and accumulated interest. The total amount due is $2.4 million. Richard's face went pale as he read the document. Amelia, please. You know I'm good for it. My company has been successful for years. One bad project shouldn't destroy everything I've built. One bad project combined with poor financial planning and unrealistic projections, she corrected. I've reviewed your entire file, Richard. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern of financial mismanagement that goes back several years. She could see desperation creeping into his expression, the realization that his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. I want you to honor your contracts, she said simply. If you can't make the payments, we'll need to discuss alternative arrangements, including potential liquidation of collateral. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Patricia Walsh outlining the technical aspects of the loan agreements while Richard sat in stunned silence. When it was over, he stood to leave, moving like a man in shock. At the conference room door, he turned back to face her. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He said bitterly. Getting your revenge on me. Amelia looked at him calmly. Richard, if I wanted revenge, I would have called in your loans without offering this meeting. This is business, nothing more. You borrowed money with the promise to pay it back. Either honor that promise or face the consequences. After he left, Patricia Walsh gathered the documents. That was intense. Do you think he'll be able to make the payment? No, Amelia said with certainty. He doesn't have $2 million and he doesn't have the ability to generate it in 30 days. Richard always lived on borrowed time and borrowed money. Eventually the bills come due. That evening, alone in her study at Blackwood Manor, Amelia reflected on the meeting. Seeing Richard's shock and desperation had been satisfying, but not in the way she might have expected. She didn't feel cruel or vindictive. Instead, she felt a profound sense of justice being served. For 8 years, Richard had made her feel small, inadequate, and worthless. He had convinced her that she lacked ambition, that she would never amount to anything significant. Now he was discovering just how wrong he had been. But more importantly, she was discovering who she was when she had real power. She was fair but firm, professional but not cold. She hadn't used her position to actively harm Richard, but she also hadn't bent the rules to save him from the consequences of his own poor decisions. This was who she had always been, she realized. Richard had simply never bothered to look closely enough to see it. The annual Metropolitan Business Alliance Charity Gala was the social event of the season, bringing together the city's most influential business leaders, politicians, and philanthropists. Amelia had attended similar events during her marriage to Richard, always feeling like an outsider in her department store dresses while surrounded by women in designer gowns worth more than most people's cars. Tonight was different. She stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom at Blackwood Manor, adjusting the elegant black evening gown that had been custom-made by a designer Rebecca had recommended. The dress was understated but unmistakably expensive, paired with diamond earrings that had belonged to Silas Blackwood's mother and a vintage clutch that complemented the overall look perfectly. You look absolutely stunning, Miss Hayes, Mrs. Patterson said from the doorway. Mr. Blackwood would be so proud to see you representing the family at tonight's event. This would be Amelia's first major public appearance as the head of Blackwood Industries. For the past 2 months, she had kept a relatively low profile, focusing on learning the business and building relationships with key employees. But Jonathan Sterling had insisted that she needed to establish her presence in the community's power structure. The black sedan that served as her regular transportation had been replaced for the evening with a vintage Rolls-Royce from Silas's collection, complete with a professional driver in formal livery. As they pulled up to the hotel entrance, Amelia could see photographers waiting to capture images of the arriving guests. Just remember, Rebecca had coached her earlier, you belong here. You're not pretending to be successful, you are successful. Act like it. The hotel ballroom was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering gowns, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables decorated with elaborate floral arrangements. Amelia recognized many faces from business magazines and social columns, people whose names regularly appeared in the financial news. She had been seated at the head table, in recognition of Blackwood Industries' status as one of the event's major sponsors. To her left sat the mayor, and to her right was the CEO of the city's largest bank. The placement was deliberate, a signal to everyone in attendance that she was being accepted into the inner circle of the city's power structure. Ms. Hayes, the mayor said as she took her seat, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Silas Blackwood was a dear friend and incredible asset to our community. I hope you'll continue his tradition of civic engagement. Absolutely, Amelia replied. Mr. Blackwood left detailed notes about his charitable commitments, and I intend to honor them while also exploring new opportunities for community involvement. As dinner was served, she found herself settling into easy conversation with the other table guests. These were people who controlled billions of dollars in assets, who made decisions that affected thousands of jobs, who shaped the economic future of the entire region. And she belonged here now. The thought was still surreal but less overwhelming than it had been even a few weeks ago. Halfway through the main course, she noticed a commotion near the entrance to the ballroom. Richard had arrived, looking handsome and confident in his tuxedo, with Brittany on his arm in a silver dress that was clearly designed to attract attention. They were being seated at a table toward the back of the room, respectable, but far from the power center where Amelia now sat. She watched as Richard scanned the room, probably looking for potential business contacts or investors who might help him solve his financial problems. His gaze eventually reached the head table, and she saw the exact moment he spotted her. His confident expression crumbled, replaced by shock and something that looked like panic. He leaned over to whisper something to Brittany, who immediately turned to look in Amelia's direction. Even from across the room, she could see Brittany's confusion as Richard apparently tried to explain how his ex-wife had ended up at the most prestigious table in the room. The evening's program began with remarks from the mayor about the importance of private sector leadership in addressing community challenges. Several awards were presented to businesses that had made significant charitable contributions over the past year. Finally, the moment that Jonathan Sterling had been preparing her for arrived. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor announced, "I'd like to introduce someone who represents the future of business leadership in our community. As many of you know, we recently lost Silas Blackwood, a man who exemplified the highest standards of corporate citizenship. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce his chosen successor, the new chairwoman and CEO of Blackwood Industries, Ms. Amelia Hayes." The spotlight found her at the head table as she rose to acknowledge the applause. From her elevated position, she could see the entire ballroom, including Richard's table where both he and Brittany sat in stunned silence. "Thank you so much," Amelia said as the applause died down. "I'm deeply honored to carry on Mr. Blackwood's legacy of business excellence and community service. Blackwood Industries will continue to be a major contributor to the economic vitality of this region, and we're committed to supporting the charitable organizations that make our community stronger." She paused, looking out over the assembled crowd of business leaders and social elites. Mr. Blackwood often said that success isn't measured only by profit margins or stock prices. True success is measured by the positive impact we have on the lives of others. That philosophy will guide every decision we make going forward. The applause was warm and sustained. As she took her seat, the banker next to her leaned over with a smile. "Beautifully said. Silas would be proud. You clearly understand what it means to be a responsible steward of significant resources." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Business cards were exchanged, invitations extended, potential partnerships discussed. Amelia found herself at the center of a network that controlled vast amounts of wealth and influence, and people were genuinely interested in building relationships with her. During a brief break between the dinner and dancing portions of the evening, she excused herself to freshen up. In the ladies' room, she encountered Brittany standing at the mirror, reapplying lipstick with hands that shook slightly. "Amelia," Brittany said, her voice uncertain. We had no idea. Richard never mentioned that you were connected to Blackwood Industries." "There was no reason for him to know," Amelia replied calmly, washing her hands at the adjacent sink. "My inheritance happened after our divorce was finalized." Brittany's reflection in the mirror looked troubled. "He's been so stressed lately about business problems. I didn't realize. I mean, he always said you didn't understand business, that you were holding him back from achieving his potential." "People see what they want to see," Amelia said diplomatically. "How is married life treating you, Brittany?" The younger woman's smile looked forced. "It's wonderful, of course. Richard is incredibly successful, and we're building a beautiful life together." But her eyes told a different story. Amelia could see the doubt there, the growing realization that she might have made a mistake in choosing Richard over stability and genuine affection. "I hope you'll both be very happy," Amelia said sincerely. She had no animosity toward Brittany, who was probably discovering that Richard's charm and promises were better at attracting people than keeping them satisfied. When she returned to the ballroom, the dancing had begun. Several men approached to request dances, and she found herself enjoying the elegant formality of the occasion. During a brief pause between songs, Jonathan Sterling appeared at her elbow. "You're handling this perfectly," he said quietly. "Everyone is talking about how impressed they are with your poise and intelligence. Silas chose well." Near the end of the evening, as couples swayed to a slow jazz standard performed by the hotel's orchestra, Amelia noticed Richard approaching her table. Brittany trailed behind him, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. "Amelia," Richard said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Could I speak with you privately for a moment? She considered the request, then nodded toward a quiet corner of the ballroom away from the other guests. Brittany remained at the table, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else in the world. This is quite a transformation, Richard said once they were alone. From archivist to billionaire CEO. Quite a step up from organizing old papers. Those old papers taught me more about business than you might imagine, she replied evenly. Silas Blackwood documented every major decision he made, every lesson he learned. It was like having access to decades of graduate-level business education. Richard's jaw clenched. So what happens now? Are you going to destroy my company out of spite? Use your newfound power to get back at me for the divorce? Amelia studied his face, seeing the fear beneath his attempted bravado. Richard, I haven't done anything to your company except enforce the same lending standards we apply to all our borrowers. If Sterling Construction fails, it will be because of decisions you made, not actions I took. You could help me, he said quietly. Restructure the loans, give me more time to recover. You have that power now. Yes, I do have that power, she agreed. But I also have a responsibility to make sound business decisions. Personal history can't factor into professional obligations. She could see him struggling with the reality that his ex-wife now held his financial future in her hands. The reversal of power was complete where once he had controlled their household finances and made her feel dependent and insecure, now she controlled resources he needed to survive. Is there anything I can say that would change your mind? He asked. Amelia looked at this man who had shared her life for 8 years, who had made her feel worthless and small, who had publicly humiliated her just months before. She felt no hatred toward him anymore, but she also felt no obligation to save him from the consequences of his own choices. Honor your contracts, Richard. That's all any lender can ask. As she walked away from him, returning to the head table where the mayor was telling an amusing story about city council politics, Amelia felt a profound sense of closure. She had faced Richard as an equal, no, as his superior, and maintained her dignity and principles throughout the encounter. The girl who had walked out of the country club in humiliation 2 months ago was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who commanded respect, who had earned her position through intelligence and integrity, who would never again allow anyone to make her feel less than she was worth. The transformation was complete. The call came at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, jarring Amelia awake in her bedroom at Blackwood Manor. Patricia Walsh's voice was crisp and professional despite the early hour. Miss Hayes, I thought you should know immediately. Sterling Construction missed yesterday's deadline for their loan payment. The 30-day period expired, and we've received no communication from them regarding alternative arrangements. Amelia sat up in bed, instantly alert. She had been expecting this call, but hearing it still carried weight. What's our next step according to company policy? Standard protocol is to initiate formal collection proceedings. We'll need to send official notices to all guarantors and begin the process of securing our collateral. Sterling Construction put up several properties as security for the loans, including their main office building and a half-finished housing development. Schedule a meeting with our legal team for this afternoon, Amelia decided. I want to ensure we're following all procedures correctly and protecting the company's interests. After ending the call, she lay in bed for a few more minutes, processing what Richard's failure to pay meant. She felt no satisfaction in his troubles, but she also felt no inclination to intervene. Business was business, and personal history couldn't be allowed to influence financial decisions that affected shareholders and other stakeholders. By the time she arrived at Blackwood Tower that morning, Rebecca had already prepared a comprehensive brief on Sterling Construction's situation. The news wasn't good for Richard's company. According to our contacts in the construction industry, Rebecca reported, Sterling Construction has been hemorrhaging money for months. They've had to lay off half their workforce, and several subcontractors have filed liens against their projects for unpaid bills. The brief included copies of recent news articles about the struggling local construction market. Sterling Construction was mentioned prominently as one of several companies facing serious financial difficulties. One article quoted anonymous industry sources suggesting that Richard Sterling's high-profile lifestyle had contributed to his company's problems. There's also this, Rebecca added, handing her a printout from social media. It was from Brittany's Instagram account, posted just the night before. The photo showed her at what appeared to be an expensive restaurant with the caption, "Sometimes you need a girl's night to clear your head and think about what really matters in life." But it was the comments below the photo that caught Amelia's attention. Several people had posted questions about Richard's business troubles, and Brittany's responses suggested growing tension in their marriage. "Is it true Richard's company is in trouble?" one person had asked. Brittany's response: "People love to spread rumors. We're focusing on the positive and not letting gossip affect our happiness." But another comment was more telling. When someone asked if they were planning to start a family soon, Brittany had responded, "Taking things one day at a time right now. Life has a way of surprising you." The legal meeting that afternoon was straightforward but sobering. Blackwood Industries had every right to pursue collection of the outstanding loans, and Sterling Construction had few options for avoiding the consequences. "Based on our analysis of their financial statements," the lead attorney explained, "Sterling Construction is essentially insolvent. They have more liabilities than assets, and their revenue stream has dried up completely. Even if we restructured the debt, they wouldn't be able to service it." "What happens to Richard personally?" Amelia asked. "He signed personal guarantees on all the loans, so he's personally liable for the full amount. We can pursue his personal assets, including his home, cars, and bank accounts. Given the size of the debt, he'll likely be forced into personal bankruptcy." That evening, alone in her study at Blackwood Manor, Amelia found herself thinking about the trajectory that had led to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been the struggling wife of a man who made her feel inadequate and worthless. Now she was in a position to determine his financial future. The irony was profound, but so was the lesson. Richard's downfall wasn't really about their failed marriage or her newfound power. It was about the natural consequences of poor decision-making, financial recklessness, and a lifestyle built on unsustainable foundations. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello. Amelia, it's Brittany." The voice was shaky, uncertain. Could we talk? Please? I know this is awkward, but I don't know who else to turn to." Amelia was quiet for a moment, surprised by the call. "What did you want to discuss, Brittany?" "It's about Richard. About everything that's happening with his business. He's not handling it well. I'm scared about what he might do." "Where is Richard now?" "He's locked himself in his office at home. He's been drinking and making phone calls, trying to find someone to loan him money. He keeps saying he's going to lose everything." Amelia felt a flicker of concern, not for Richard but for Brittany, who sounded genuinely frightened. "Are you safe? Do you need to leave the house?" "I don't know. He's not violent or anything, but he's desperate. He keeps talking about how you're destroying him, how you're using your power to get revenge. I tried to tell him that you're just doing business, but he won't listen. Brittany, if you feel unsafe, you should leave. Go to a friend's house or a hotel. Don't stay somewhere you feel threatened." There was silence on the other end of the line, then quiet crying. "I made such a mistake," Brittany whispered. "I thought he was this successful, confident man who could give me everything I wanted. But it was all fake, wasn't it? The success, the money, even the confidence. It was all just an act." Amelia felt unexpected sympathy for the younger woman. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Brittany. But you need to focus on taking care of yourself right now. Richard's problems aren't your fault, and you don't have to sacrifice your well-being to help him solve them. He keeps asking me to call you to ask you to help him. He thinks because we're both women you might listen to me. I can't make exceptions to company policy based on personal appeals," Amelia said gently but firmly. "That wouldn't be fair to other borrowers or to the company's shareholders." After the call ended, Amelia sat in her study for a long time, looking out at the gardens illuminated by carefully placed landscape lighting. She thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, insecure, dependent, willing to accept Richard's assessment of her worth. That woman might have been tempted to help him out of misplaced guilt or lingering attachment. But she was no longer that woman. 3 days later, Patricia Walsh called with an update on the Sterling Construction situation. "We've begun the formal collection process," she reported. "Our attorneys have filed the necessary paperwork, and Sterling Construction's assets are being evaluated for liquidation. We should recover most of our principal, though we'll likely have to write off some interest and penalties." "And Richard's personal situation?" "His personal attorney contacted our legal team yesterday. He's requesting a meeting to discuss settlement options. Apparently, he's willing to surrender all personal assets in exchange for structured payment terms on any remaining debt." Amelia wasn't surprised. Richard was probably discovering that his expensive cars, luxury watches, and other status symbols weren't as valuable as he had thought, especially when they had been purchased with borrowed money. That afternoon, she received an unexpected visitor at Blackwood Tower. Her secretary buzzed to announce that Robert Blackwood, Silas's cousin, was requesting a meeting. Robert Blackwood was a thin, nervous man in his 50s with thinning hair and an expensive suit that couldn't quite disguise his obvious anxiety. He had been one of the relatives who had contested Silas's will, claiming that the inheritance should have remained within the family. "Ms. Hayes," he said as he entered her office, "thank you for agreeing to see me. I know we got off on the wrong foot during the probate proceedings. What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwood?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I wanted to discuss the possibility of joining the company. I have 20 years of investment management experience, and I think I could add value to the Blackwood portfolio." Amelia studied him carefully. During the will contest, Robert Blackwood had made several public statements questioning her competence and suggesting that Silas had been manipulated into changing his will. Now he was asking for a job. "I'm curious," she said. 6 months ago, you were claiming I wasn't qualified to inherit this position. What's changed your mind?" Robert's face flushed slightly. "I may have been hasty in my initial reaction. I was grieving Silas's death and perhaps not thinking clearly about the situation. Or perhaps you've realized that your legal challenges aren't going to succeed, and you're hoping to benefit from the inheritance you couldn't claim." The blunt assessment clearly stung, but Robert pressed on. "My investment firm is facing some challenges in the current market. I thought perhaps we could find a way to work together, to combine our resources for mutual benefit." "Your investment firm is failing," Amelia said matter-of-factly. "You've lost several major clients and you're facing regulatory scrutiny for questionable trading practices. You're not looking for a partnership, Mr. Blackwood. You're looking for a bailout." Robert's composure cracked completely. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Silas was supposed to help family when they needed it. I'm his blood relative, not some random employee he barely knew. Silas chose to help people based on their character and values, not their last name," Amelia replied calmly. "He made his decision for good reasons, and I intend to honor his judgment." After Robert left, visibly upset and empty-handed, Amelia reflected on how many people seem to emerge from the shadows when wealth changed hands. Former relatives, struggling business associates, even casual acquaintances suddenly developed urgent needs that required her financial assistance. But perhaps the most dramatic example came the following week, when Richard finally broke completely. She was working late in her office when Rebecca rushed in, looking uncharacteristically flustered. "Miss Hayes, there's a situation downstairs. Security called. Richard Sterling is in the lobby demanding to see you. He appears to be intoxicated and he's making quite a scene." Amelia sighed. She had been expecting something like this as Richard's world continued to collapse around him. "Have security escort him out, but don't have him arrested unless he becomes violent. I don't want to make this situation worse than it already is." 20 minutes later, Patricia Walsh called from the ground floor lobby. "He's gone now," she reported, but not before making quite a spectacle. "He was shouting about how you're destroying innocent people's lives, how you're abusing your power for personal revenge." Several people recorded it on their phones. By morning, videos of Richard's drunken rant in the lobby of Blackwood Tower were circulating on social media. In the footage, he looked haggard and desperate, ranting about his ex-wife's vendetta, while security guards tried to calm him down. The public meltdown was the final nail in the coffin of Richard's reputation. Whatever sympathy he might have had from the business community evaporated as people watched him make wild accusations against a respected corporate leader. But it was the aftermath of the incident that provided the most telling insight into how completely the tables had turned. The next morning, Amelia arrived at her office to find a resignation letter from Brittany Sterling not addressed to her, but forwarded by someone who thought she should see it. Brittany had apparently quit her job at the marketing firm where she worked, and the letter referenced personal circumstances that make it impossible to continue in my current position. That afternoon, Brittany called again. "I left him," she said without preamble. "I moved out yesterday while he was sleeping off his latest bender. I can't do this anymore, Amelia. I can't watch him destroy himself and try to drag everyone else down with him." "I'm sorry it came to this," Amelia said sincerely. "I keep thinking about something you said at the charity gala. About people seeing what they want to see. I saw the successful businessman, the confident provider, the man who could give me security. But that person never really existed, did he? It was all just Richard trying to convince himself he was something he wasn't." "People can change," Amelia offered. "Maybe this crisis will help him reassess his priorities and make better choices." Brittany laughed bitterly. "He's not changing. He's just getting more desperate and more angry. Yesterday he spent 3 hours ranting about how you've ruined his life, how everything was perfect until you inherited that money. He can't accept that his problems started long before your inheritance. After hanging up, Amelia realized that Richard's complete collapse was serving as a cautionary tale that extended far beyond their personal history. Word was spreading through the business community about what happened when someone overextended themselves financially, lived beyond their means, and built their success on unsustainable foundations. She had become, without intending to, an example of how quickly fortunes could change and how important it was to maintain both financial discipline and personal integrity. The irony was not lost on her that Richard's public humiliation of her at the country club had been the catalyst for a chain of events that led to his own much more dramatic downfall. If he had handled their divorce with dignity and respect, she would have moved on with her life and never given him another thought. Instead, his cruelty had created a situation where his ex-wife was in a position to witness if not directly cause his complete destruction. Justice, she reflected, sometimes had a very long memory and an excellent sense of timing. It was a rainy Thursday evening in October when the call came to Blackwood Manor. Amelia was in her study reviewing quarterly reports from the Renewable Energy Division, when Mrs. Patterson knocked softly on the door. "Miss Hayes, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a gentleman at the gate requesting to see you. Security says it's Richard Sterling and he appears to be distressed." Amelia set down her pen and looked toward the window, where she could see the lights of the security booth at the estate's entrance. She had been expecting this confrontation for weeks, ever since Richard's business had finally collapsed completely and Brittany had left him. "Is he alone?" "Yes, ma'am. And he doesn't appear to be intoxicated this time, just very upset." "Have security escort him to the front door, but ask them to remain nearby. I'll see him in the living room." 10 minutes later, Richard stood in the elegant living room of Blackwood Manor, looking like a shadow of the confident man who had humiliated her at the country club 8 months earlier. His expensive suit had been replaced by jeans and a wrinkled shirt. His perfectly styled hair was unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant stress. The transformation was startling. This was not the successful businessman who had once made her feel inadequate and small. This was a broken man who had lost everything: his business, his wife, his home, his reputation, and apparently his sense of self-worth. "Hello, Richard," Amelia said calmly, gesturing toward one of the leather armchairs. "Please sit down." He remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides. "Do you know what you've done to me?" he demanded, his voice shaking with emotion. "Do you have any idea what my life has become because of your revenge?" "I know that your business failed because you couldn't pay your debts," she replied evenly. "I know that your marriage ended because your wife realized she had married an illusion rather than a reality. But I'm not responsible for either of those outcomes, Richard." "You are. You could have helped me," he exploded. "You had the power to restructure my loans to give me time to recover. Instead, you chose to destroy me because I hurt your feelings during the divorce." Amelia studied his face, seeing the desperation and denial that had driven him to this point. Even now, facing complete ruin, he couldn't accept responsibility for his own choices. "Richard, sit down," she said more firmly. "If you want to have this conversation, we're going to have it properly." Something in her tone must have penetrated his anger, because he slowly sank into the chair across from her. For a moment, they sat in silence, the sound of rain against the windows filling the space between them. "I treated you fairly," Amelia said quietly. "I gave you 30 days to make your payment, which is standard policy for all borrowers. I offered you the opportunity to present a restructuring plan, which you couldn't do because your business was already insolvent. I applied the same lending standards to Sterling Construction that we apply to every other company. But I'm your ex-husband," Richard said desperately. "That should have counted for something." "Why?" she asked genuinely. "Because you spent 8 years making me feel worthless? Because you convinced everyone we knew that I was holding you back from success? Because you publicly humiliated me at the country club while celebrating your new marriage?" Richard flinched at each accusation, but he didn't deny any of them. "If anything," Amelia continued, "our personal history should have made me more careful about appearing to show favoritism. I couldn't be seen as using company resources to help my ex-husband, regardless of our relationship. So you decided to destroy me instead. I decided to run a business responsibly. Your destruction was entirely self-inflicted, Richard. You borrowed more money than you could repay, you lived beyond your means, you made poor business decisions, and you prioritized appearances over financial stability. Those choices led to your downfall, not anything I did or didn't do." She leaned forward slightly, her voice becoming gentler but no less firm. "Do you want to know what would have happened if our situations were reversed? If you had inherited billions of dollars and I had been the one with financial problems? Richard didn't answer, but she could see in his eyes that he knew what she was going to say. You would have let me fail, she said simply. You wouldn't have bent the rules or made exceptions. You would have said it was business, nothing personal, and you would have moved on without a second thought. Because that's who you are, Richard. That's who you've always been. That's not true, he protested weakly. Isn't it? When I lost my job 3 years ago and was struggling to find work, did you offer to support me while I looked for something new? No, you told me I was being too picky and needed to accept any job that would pay the bills. When I wanted to go back to school to improve my qualifications, did you encourage me? No, you told me we couldn't afford it and I should be grateful for what I had. Richard's face crumpled as the truth of her words hit him. For perhaps the first time he was seeing their relationship from her perspective, understanding how his constant criticism and dismissal had affected her. You never believed in me, Amelia continued. You never thought I was capable of anything significant. You saw me as a burden, an obstacle to your success. And now you're angry because I didn't use my success to save you from the consequences of your own failures. I'm sorry, he whispered, and for the first time in their entire relationship, she believed he meant it. I'm sorry for how I treated you, for the things I said, for making you feel small. You deserved better than that. The apology hung in the air between them, 8 years too late but somehow still meaningful. Amelia felt something inside her chest loosen, a knot of pain and resentment that she hadn't even realized she was still carrying. Thank you for saying that, she said softly. It means more than you know. They sat in silence for several minutes, the rain continuing to patter against the windows. Finally, Richard spoke again, his voice barely audible. What happens to me now? You file for bankruptcy, you start over, and you try to make better choices this time, Amelia said practically. You're still young enough to rebuild your life, Richard. But you have to do it based on reality, not on illusions and borrowed money. I don't know how to start over. Everything I worked for is gone. Everything you thought you worked for was built on a foundation that couldn't support it, she corrected. This is your chance to build something real, something sustainable. But you have to be honest about your mistakes and learn from them. Richard nodded slowly, seeming to absorb her words. When he looked up at her again, there was something different in his expression, not the desperation or anger of earlier, but a kind of exhausted acceptance. I used to think you were lucky, he said quietly. Lucky to have a simple job, lucky not to have the pressure of running a business, lucky to be married to someone successful. But you weren't lucky at all, were you? You were strong. You were capable. You just needed someone to give you the opportunity to show it. Silas Blackwood saw something in me that you never did, she agreed. But more importantly, I finally learned to see it in myself. Richard stood to leave, moving like a man who had aged years in the space of their conversation. At the living room doorway, he paused and turned back to face her. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Proud of what you've accomplished, proud of the person you've become. I know I have no right to say that, but it's true. Richard, she called as he reached the front door. He turned back to look at her one final time. I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you become the person you have the potential to be. After he left, Amelia sat alone in the living room for a long time, processing what had just occurred. The confrontation she had been anticipating had ended not with anger or recrimination, but with something approaching understanding and closure. She felt no triumph in Richard's downfall, no satisfaction in his suffering. But she also felt no obligation to save him from consequences he had brought upon himself through years of poor decisions and financial recklessness. The woman who had walked out of the country club 8 months ago, humiliated and defeated, was gone forever. In her place sat someone who commanded respect, who made decisions based on principle rather than emotion, who had learned to value herself according to her own standards rather than other people's opinions. The rain was beginning to let up as she finally turned off the lights and headed upstairs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new ways to prove that Silas Blackwood's faith in her had been justified. But tonight she felt a profound sense of peace. The chapter of her life that had included Richard Sterling was finally, completely closed. 1 year later, Amelia stood on the stage of the newly constructed Blackwood Community Center, looking out at a crowd of several hundred people gathered for the dedication ceremony. The morning sun streamed through the glass walls of the building's main atrium, illuminating faces that represented every segment of the community: families, business leaders, local politicians, and dozens of children who would benefit from the center's programs. The past 12 months had been a whirlwind of growth, learning, and transformation. Under her leadership, Blackwood Industries had expanded its renewable energy division, acquired 3 smaller companies that aligned with Silas's values, and increased charitable giving by 40%. She had proven herself not just as an inheritor of wealth, but as a visionary leader who could build upon the legacy she had been entrusted with. "Friends and neighbors," she began, her voice carrying easily through the microphone system. "When Silas Blackwood chose me to continue his life's work, he left me with a profound responsibility. He believed that wealth was not just about personal comfort, but about the ability to create positive change in our community." The crowd was attentive and engaged, very different from the skeptical audiences she had faced in those first few months when people questioned her qualifications and wondered if she was just a temporary figurehead. Now, after a year of successful leadership and concrete results, she had earned their respect and trust. This community center represents everything Mr. Blackwood believed in: education, opportunity, and the importance of investing in our shared future. It will provide after-school programs for children, job training for adults, health and wellness services for seniors, and meeting spaces for local organizations. But most importantly, it will serve as a reminder that we are all connected, and that we all have a responsibility to help each other succeed. As she spoke, she caught sight of several familiar faces in the crowd. Mrs. Patterson and the rest of the Blackwood Manor staff, who had become like family to her over the past year. Jonathan Sterling and Patricia Walsh, who had helped guide her through the complexities of running a major corporation. The mayor, several city council members, and other business leaders who had welcomed her into the community's power structure. But it was the face near the back of the crowd that surprised her most. Thomas Chin, the architect who had designed the community center, stood with a group of his colleagues, looking proud of the building they had created together. Over the past 6 months, their professional relationship had gradually evolved into something more personal, though they had kept it private out of respect for her public position. Thomas was everything Richard had never been: thoughtful, genuine, more interested in creating beautiful, functional spaces than in projecting an image of success. He had been patient with her cautious approach to dating, understanding that her previous marriage had left her wary of trusting her judgment about men. After the ceremony concluded and she had shaken dozens of hands and posed for countless photographs, Thomas approached her with a warm smile. "Beautiful speech," he said quietly. "Silas would be proud of what you've accomplished." "We've accomplished," she corrected. "This building exists because you understood my vision and found a way to make it real." They walked together through the various rooms and facilities, watching families explore the children's play areas, seniors examining the fitness equipment, and teenagers checking out the computer lab that would provide free internet access and technology training. "You know," Thomas said as they paused in front of a wall display showing the center's planned programs, "a year ago I was just another architect competing for a major commission. I had no idea I was going to meet someone who would change my entire perspective on what it means to use your talents to serve others." Amelia felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "A year ago I was filing divorce papers and wondering how I was going to rebuild my life. Funny how quickly things can change." They were interrupted by a commotion near the entrance, where a local news crew was conducting interviews with attendees. Amelia recognized the reporter as someone who had covered her transition to leadership at Blackwood Industries, always fair and professional in her coverage. "Ms. Hayes," the reporter called out as she spotted them. "Could we get a quick interview about the community center and your plans for Blackwood Industries going forward?" The interview was brief but wide-ranging, covering everything from the company's financial performance to her personal philosophy about corporate responsibility. As it concluded, the reporter asked one final question. "It's been exactly 1 year since you inherited control of the Blackwood Empire. What has surprised you most about this experience?" Amelia thought for a moment before answering. "I think what surprised me most is discovering that leadership isn't about having all the answers or being the smartest person in the room. It's about bringing out the best in other people, about creating an environment where everyone can contribute their talents toward shared goals. I may be the CEO, but everything we've accomplished has been a team effort." As the news crew packed up their equipment and the crowd began to disperse, Amelia found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed. The shy, uncertain woman who had been intimidated by Richard's business associates had evolved into someone who felt comfortable speaking to reporters, addressing large crowds, and making decisions that affected thousands of employees and community members. That evening, she hosted a small dinner party at Blackwood Manor for the key people who had made the community center possible. Thomas sat to her right, with Jonathan Sterling and Patricia Walsh across the table, along with several other executives and the project managers who had overseen the construction. During dessert, Patricia raised her wine glass in a toast. To Amelia, who has proven that the best leaders are those who never expected to be leaders. Your first year as CEO has exceeded everyone's expectations, including your own. As glasses clinked around the table, Amelia felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of her divorce, the humiliation at the country club, even the overwhelming shock of inheriting Silas's fortune, all of it had been necessary steps in becoming the person she was today. After the guests had departed and she was alone in her study, reviewing notes for the next day's board meeting, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw the news coverage of the community center dedication. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished. You deserve all the success you've found. She stared at the message for a long moment, recognizing Richard's attempt to reach out. In the years since their final confrontation at the manor, she had heard only occasional updates about his situation. He had filed for bankruptcy as expected, had taken a job as a project manager with a larger construction firm, and was apparently trying to rebuild his life on a more modest scale. She typed a brief response, "Thank you. I hope you're doing well." Then she set the phone aside and returned to her work. Richard Sterling belonged to a different chapter of her life, one that had ended with forgiveness but not reconciliation. She wished him well, but she had no desire to reopen that relationship or relitigate that history. The future stretched ahead of her, full of possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. Blackwood Industries continued to grow and evolve under her leadership. The community center was just the first of several major charitable initiatives she had planned. And for the first time in years, she was genuinely excited about her personal life as well, curious to see where her relationship with Thomas might lead. As she prepared for bed that night, Amelia paused in front of the photograph of Silas Blackwood that sat on her desk. The old man's stern expression seemed somehow approving, as if he were pleased with the choices she had made and the direction she had taken his company. "Thank you," she whispered to the photograph, "for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself. For giving me the chance to become who I was meant to be." The house settled into its nighttime quiet around her as she turned off the lights and headed upstairs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, new ways to honor the trust that Silas Blackwood had placed in her. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Amelia Hayes felt completely at peace with who she was and where she was going. The girl who had once accepted Richard's assessment of her worth was gone forever, replaced by a woman who knew her own value and refused to let anyone diminish it. She had not just inherited a fortune, she had inherited the power to shape her own destiny and the wisdom to use that power responsibly. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift Silas Blackwood could have given her. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning.